supernovas can trace their origins back to the second founding in the wake of the most cataclysmic event in mankind's history. Situated in the northeast of the galaxy, the chapters, by both design and necessity, adopted an independent and headstrong attitude to the galaxy. Often forgotten by the bureaucracy of the Imperium and declared lost entirely at least twice, the supernovas nevertheless have a distinguished legacy of loyal service should one know where to look for it. No records remain of the chapter's founding, save those held by the supernovas themselves, and these have been corrupted by time. Yet enough remains that some sliver of truth might be gleaned from them. According to the legends passed down by the librarians, Thessal was visited by the forces of the 13th Legion in the wake of the Horus Heresy. Their leader was an officer named Laertes, a veteran of the Great Crusade who had become disillusioned with the galaxy. He had witnessed a war that was unthinkable. Astartes killing Astartes, Primarchs slain in battle, and even the Emperor himself mortally wounded. Laertes was a man gripped by a longing for a better, brighter age that could never return. In his melancholy, he came to Thessal. It is said Laertes found the world in the grip of an orc invasion. The people of Thessal, having regressed to a feudal state, were ill-equipped to deal with the invasion. The 13th Legionnaires came to their aid, falling from the sky with calculated fury to cleanse the orcs. After the swift and brutal wars, Laertes lingered to the help the Thessalian people rebelled. In Thessal, he saw a grim mirror of the Imperium as a whole, for the planet was ravaged by war, plagued by infighting, and ignorant of its lost glory. Despite these trials, Laertes saw something in the people of Thessal he had thought lost forever: hope. The Thessalians had not been cowed by fear at the sight of a foe beyond their means to defeat, nor did they look upon the ancient ruins of their world with despair. As Laertes traveled the planet and learned of its cultures, he saw a common theme among the disparate people. Each of them, in their own way, were proud to inherit whatever sliver of the past they had, and each carried it forward as best they could. This defiant hope rekindled the spirit of Laertes, and with the legions disbanding, he petitioned his Primarch to the right to found a chapter of his own. He adopted the name Supernovas, and the chapter took his heraldry as their own. However, instead of adopting the Codex as Guilliman decreed, Laertes chose to retain the structure of the Legion, a choice that would forever shape the chapter and its future. With a fortress monastery established and a chapter recognized, Laertes set about creating nothing less than a legion in miniature. His forces, though only 1,000 strong, would remain built around the idea of large, uniformly equipped squads of troops. Instead of using scouts, new recruits were brought straight into the battle lines as regular Marines were. While the first company was retained as an elite force under Laertes' personal command, the remaining companies were not split into battle and reserve categories, but instead split into battle line and specialist companies. These decisions were not well received by many of the chapter's original officers, who were conflicted between their loyalty to Laertes and the Primarch. Yet, with the shadow of heresy still looming over them, no one wished to openly challenge the chapter master. Some captains obeyed, others defied him in their own way, restructuring their company to be Codex compliant. Yet, ultimately, Laertes outlived enough of his officers that his choices could not be undone in time. When he finally fell in battle, Laertes was replaced by a Thessalian-born officer who had embraced his unorthodoxy. Thus, the chapter's identity and future were decided. The Supernovas would not retain the Legion structure after the deaths of Laertes, but nor would they return to the Codex. Instead, they became a strange hybrid of these two. The notion of the Scout Company was never accepted by the new blood, and the company was ultimately absorbed into the remaining 9. The first would remain a veteran company, but no longer under direct command of the chapter master. The other 8 would effectively all be battle companies, each with between 6 and 12 battle line squads, now known simply as battle squads, with the bulk of the rest being made up of fire support squads. Rather than forming permanent close support squads, the chapter encouraged battle squads to be trained in the use of land speeders, bikes, and the chapter's limited stockpile of jump packs so that these units could be reassigned as needed. these reforms were accepted by differing factions within the chapter, but they did not heal the rifts that had formed. The companies were still distant from each other. The solution was not to force unity, but codify the division. Each company was given one of the chapter's outposts under Sol and ordered to expand it from a simple recruiting post to a miniature fortress monastery. Each captain would, in effect, be master of a micro-chapter. This choice was well received and, in its own way, healed the lingering wounds from their founding. After centuries of unease, the Supernovas were ready to face the galaxy as a united whole. To understand the character of a chapter, you must know their people. So it is with the Supernovas and the myriad peoples of Tassal. It would not be an exaggeration to call Tassal a death world. Even the most hospitable regions are preyed upon by towering predators, ravaged by great plagues, and subject to tempestuous shifts in climate. Tassal's habitable landmass is almost exclusively found upon a central supercontinent, leaving vast tracts of empty ocean for wind and tide to whip up storms of apocalyptic proportion. Entire nations can be swept away in a summer storm, forcing the survivors to flee to the high ground of mountain ranges or deep into the central jungles of Wildstalk. Yet, neither of these places are welcoming to man. Great beasts swoop between the razor peaks of Tassal's mountains, large and strong enough to smash apart a battle tank. But even these titans are prey to the shrieking swarms of feeder bats and flock by the thousands, and such a swarm can devour a human in a heartbeat, leaving naught but strips of bloody cloth and splintered bone. As grim as those mountains are, they are paradise compared to the jungle of the Wildstalk. The great trees grow so close together that no sunlight reaches the ground, and even the trees themselves have a taste for warm flesh. Countless souls have plunged screaming into the hidden sinkholes or corrosive pools to be rendered down with cruel slowness into nutritious soup for the trees to drink. That more men die to their fellow man than the world itself is a testament to both Tassalian hardiness and their natural instinct for war. The people of Tassal are split between thousands of tribes, and even the Supernovas are not certain how many distinct cultures dwell upon their world. There are the Bastion men, who defend their forts and farms with ranks of Orthodox musketeers, the Forgers, like the legendary armorers of Yeath, who make the great guns and ordnance that top the fortress walls of Tassal's many bastion cities, the men of the war trains whose military convoys trade between the two, and the tribals, like the infamous berserkers of Quaith, who loot and plunder all three. Each of these cultures, and more besides, provide no shortage of war-ready recruits for the chapter. Each culture in turn brings a different perspective on the nature of war, and the regions from which each company recruits has subtly altered their personalities. As with most things, how a Tassalian rises from mortal youth to angel of death varies from company to company. Each has their own recruiting ground and edicts that dictate how and when recruitment take place. Some recruits are taken from formal tournaments held annually at various city keeps, others are taken from the young soldiers seeking to prove themselves in war. Any youth that can manage to reach the isolated company bastion is automatically considered, but the roads to these imposing fortresses are lined with the bones of those who failed in the attempt. Whatever the source, the chapter subjects their aspirants to rigorous trials of physical and mental purity. The most important of these is known as the progenitor's gift, where the youth is infused with a tiny piece of genetic material said to be cloned from the cells of Rabute Gilliman himself. The sedated youth is monitored as the gift takes hold, or not, as the case may be. Some die during this time, most trash and wail as fever dreams assail their mind and their bodies are painfully reshaped. Even then, many of these changes will not be enough, and the recruit will ultimately awake to be told they have rejected the gift. These failed recruits become chapter serfs, and while no space marine by any measure, their experiences typically leave them physically and mentally enhanced to some degree, however slight. For the rest whose bodies accepted the gift, the true test begins. The company bastion becomes their world. For years they live and train there, watched constantly by the chaplains, librarians and apothecaries. Each of these has something to teach, and some measure by which they will pass or fail the aspirant. It is during this time that the unique mutations of the chapter's gene seed take hold, heightening the aspirant's reaction beyond even their brother Astartes. However, that same quirk also slows their muscle growth, meaning that they will not achieve their peak physical powers until years, if not decades after their training is otherwise complete. Unlike in most chapters who make use of scouts, supernovan aspirants will never take to the field of battle. Such an honor is reserved for the end of their training, when there is nothing left to do but throw the young warrior into the crucible of war and see if they are forged into a warrior worthy of their heraldry or revealed as naught but slag and ash. In this final stage, the would-be space marine is known as a novitiae, those without life. They are outsiders within the chapter, forbidden from wearing honor markings or the heraldry of the company, and denied even the basic possessions of an Astartes, their holy weapons and armor. In this time, the novitiae has one source of companionship, a mentor chosen to watch over them in battle. It is the mentor who decides what arms and armor the novitiae may use, and who provides the final guidance to them to complete their training. But training is not the mentor's true role. Instead, their duty is to judge whether the novitiae is worthy of life. How this judgment takes place is a personal choice. Some novitiae are functionally indistinguishable from their blooded kin, armed and armored in the same fashion and needing only to complete a single mission before earning their mentor's approval. Others serve much longer and in more challenging conditions. A novitiae might have to serve in scout armor and armed with only a pistol and blade. Some may have to slay a certain number of foes or perform a singular feat of heroism before being found worthy. Although it may appear adversarial at first, the novitiae and mentor typically bond during the time of trials. Indeed, novitiae and mentor often share a genetic link, with the former receiving gene seed harvested from the latter, or both descending from the gene tithe of a fallen brother. This tradition creates bloodlines of a sort within the chapter, and so, while a novitiae is an outcast to most of the chapter, they are seen as family to their squad, and many will have something akin to a parent and child relationship with their mentor. When at last a novitiae is deemed worthy, they attend a ritual known as the blooding. Novitiae and mentor will both cut themselves with a sword, which is then presented to the novitiae. Upon receiving of a sword, a novitiae is reborn a nova estra, a full-fledged space marine, and welcomed by all as an equal. The 9 companies of the Supernovas are made up of warriors that, in their own way, seek to emulate the ideals of their ancient founder, to be a legion in a time of chapters. Nowhere is this more clear than their war gear. The armories of the Supernovas chapter are home to numerous relics, and the Supernovas have gone to great lengths to ensure that they can preserve and often replace the tools of days long past. The typical weapons of a supernovan are Umbra and Tigris pattern bolters, both designs mostly lost or abandoned. Most Marines wear a modern recreation of Corvus plate, although several of their suits date back to the time of legend. As each company has its own armory and armorers, so too does each have a distinct character. Some, like the 4th, have presented arsenals of Corvus that were worn in the heresy itself. The 5th have managed to maintain a stockpile of Maximus plate, and, slow and difficult as it is, they can even replace lost suits. The 8th, due to the presence of the Ironforge chapter cult, favor iron plate or regional variations built for boarding actions. To see the supernovas in the field is to witness the armies of the legions. Yet, this love of the past has on occasion slipped into stubborn refusal to accept change. The supernovas are distrustful of new technology that didn't come from their own forges or expeditions. An example of this is Centurion armor. 5 millennia after its inception, most supernovas refuse to use it, declaring it heretical. Supernovans wear blue armor with the shoulders and helmet typically black. This is not universal, and an individual Marine may change the uniform to suit their own desires. Typical changes include reversing the shoulder inset and trim colors, or changing the color of knees or backpack tops. In addition, each company has its own heraldic color. This is not fixed, but instead chosen by the captain. The fourth, for example, have red shoulder trims or, due to their large number of corvus suits, use a red band or red shoulder studs. The fifth use green markings however the individual Marine desires. The sixth favor yellow knee pads, and eighth use gunmetal. Further to this are squads or personal honors. These markings are subject to change as the individuals who earned them die off and new heroes rise. No heraldry is permanent, supernovan colors honoring the living, not the dead. The only exception to this is the chapter's blue uniform and the uniform of the subcults. All else is mutable. Since M38, the Supernovas have traditionally painted their helmets to match the heraldic colors of the chapter master, but following the events of the Way of Lost Faith and the Tyrannic War, this seems to have been abandoned. Instead, Master Dias and most of the chapter have retained the black helms worn in honor of the late Master Zemo. The Supernovas have a curious relationship with the Emperor and the Imperial cult. Most Supernovans appear to doubt the very existence of Terra itself, referring to it as not a physical place, but a spiritual realm where the souls of the dead go to await the end of days. According to the chapter, there will come a day when all light in the galaxy fades, bar one. In the final hours of man, Tassal will be alone in the heavens with all other worlds lost to chaos. In that day, the Emperor himself shall return, leading the Legion of the Dead to reclaim the stars and build a new Imperium and begin the next age of man. The cult and its culture has adopted many of the traits of the Tassalian peoples, with the history and traditions of the chapter coming together to create a culture of individualism. Every Marine is expected to be an army in and of themselves, and while the bonds they form within squads are unshakable, these are not carried further into the chapter's structure. A captain leads only because the sergeants choose to follow, and the companies see the chapter master as someone there to advise and guide, not dictate. This ideology can serve as a double-edged sword, for as valuable as it may be to trust a squad to act with autonomy, the same squad may not always wish to adhere to a rigid battle plan. One of the defining factions of the Supernovas is the ritual of Teikar. The sword is a holy symbol for the chapter, a symbol of their transition from Novitae to Nover Astra. However, a sword drawn in anger must taste blood. This is the law of Teikar. This must be satisfied, and a Marine who cannot wet his blade on the blood of a foe will cut himself to feed it. To seethe a Tassalian blade without it first tasting blood is an insult of the highest order, and one can only speculate what would befall a Marine who did so. Over the long millennia, the Supernovas have established traditional paths through the galaxy that they use for patrols and pilgrimage. These are the chapter's ways, and the chapter considers every world along these routes to be under their protection. Most remain close to Tassal, but some stretch as far as Ultramar, Terra, or even the Eye itself. Most ways are patrolled by a single squad, as this is typically more than enough to defeat whatever threats they find. However, should this patrol be unable to succeed alone, they can call upon reinforcements from Tassal to carry the day. The Way of the Dead. There are times when a Supernovan feels they are unable to continue their service to the chapter. Age, injury, or even some internal conflict might inspire a Marine to embark upon the Way of the Dead and begin the long trek to Holy Terra and beyond. When a Marine undertakes this journey, a great ceremony of mourning is held for them, for they are never to return to Tassal. They then travel across the Imperium, visiting shrines and holy places. Most will die along the way, lured to their end in one of the 1,000 battles that rage across man's domain. Should they reach Terra, they will seek the blessings of the Emperor and steel their souls for the final leg of their pilgrimage, the journey to the Eye itself, where they might at last meet a worthy end. Within the chapter, there also exist subcults, each of which is typically a combination of cultural traits of a prominent Tassalian people and a shared talent or a fondness for an aspect of war. The chaplaincy, librarius, apothecarian, and armorium all represent obvious examples of subcults, but there also exist organizations unique to the chapter. The Naked Berserkers. The term Naked Berserkers conjures a great many images, especially when applied to an Astartes chapter. However, when used by the Supernovas, it is somewhat misleading. The naked berserkers are near-universally Marines who are drawn from the tribes of Quaithe. Within these cultures, it is not uncommon for small bands of warriors, often drugged to the point of insanity, to charge into battle sky-clad as proof of their bravery. While the chapter has long been happy to allow the Quaithian Marines to pump themselves full of combat stimulants, the other aspects of the traditions were not so readily accepted. The compromise provided was that, as far as was practical, Quaithian Marines would go to battle without a helmet. This tradition has sent many Marines to an early grave, but the chapter considers the trade-off acceptable in the long terms, as the devotees of the Quaithian cult are some of the most brutal close-combat fighters, not to mention the most fearless fighters in the chapter. Dedicated berserker squads are quite rare, though not through lack of Quaithian Marines. Instead, they prefer to spread themselves through all other aspects of the chapter, where they can better upstage their less courageous battle brothers. The Ironforged. Once a very niche subcult found almost exclusively in the 8th Company, the Ironforged were born on the fortress world of Haraz. Years of brutal siege warfare, trench fighting and bunker clearance had a profound impact on the Novitae who were tested in the campaign, creating a culture of grim, dour warriors at odds with the typical headstrong, independent attitude of their peers. The Ironforged became line-breakers, trusted to break open fortifications or wear down foes with patience and cold calculations. Of these original Ironforged, only Brock the First Forged survives, and even then he is interred within a dreadnought. Yet, every year a precious few Marines are deemed worthy to stand before Brock and be judged, and so the name Ironforged and the warrior cult itself has endured. Toward the end of M41, the Ironforged were dying out, but following the Tyrannic War and the promotion of Dios Ironforged to Chapter Master, the ideals of the Ironforged have been raised to a new status within the chapter. Despite the nature of most supernovans, more now than ever aspire to earn the name Ironforged. The Stalkers. Much like the Ironforged, the Stalkers are typified by their deviance from chapter norms. Where most supernovans seek honor and glory, a stalker is willing to set aside their pride and do what is needed for victory, working from the shadows to perform reconnaissance, sabotage, or assassination. Stalkers are few in number and almost always from the First Company, as these veterans have earned more than enough glory to satisfy their pride. The Fusiliers. The Fusiliers are a direct offshoot of the Stalkers, drawn exclusively from the new Primaris intake. Typically trained as reavers before being adopted into the cult, Fusiliers seek to emulate the soldiers of Yeth, from where they take their name, acting as marksmen who slay from afar. The rivalry between Stalkers and Fusiliers has quickly become a point of pride within the chapter, and the previous shunned Stalkers have found themselves being encouraged by their peers to outperform their Primaris rivals at every opportunity. The Oathsworn. While many supernovans faced the Tyrannic War and lived, there is a special subdivision of these veterans who have the honor of being named Oathsworn. The name is derived from the Bright Lords chapter, whose symbol is a candle lit against a black field. The bulk of the Supernovas chapter was deployed on a crusade when the Tyranids attacked, and due to the shadow in the warp, they could not return home. Yet, the ancient Starforge of the Bright Lords, Sion Shakar, was able to pierce the shadow and bring the chapter to bear, as well as create a wake of calm for an Imperial fleet and the Supernovans to follow. This act and the countless other performed both in orbit and on the surface of Tassal created a debt the Supernovans chapter believes it might never be able to repay. The Oathsworn represent an effort to do so. Each company has at least one squad of Oathsworn, and the 5th captain counts herself amongst their number. These Marines pledged an oath to answer the call of the Bright Lords, and this oath supersedes all others, even their oaths to their own chapter. When the Bright Lords need them most, the Oathsworn will repay the debt of honor, no matter the cost. By the 42nd millennium, the Supernovas chapter had already endured several hardships. Internal division and a Tyranid invasion of their homeworld had brought the chapter to the brink of extinction, but perhaps due to the psychic shadow of the hive mind, Tassal and the nearby systems escaped the birth of the Cicatrix maledictum virtually unscathed. This bought the chapter precious time to rebuild itself, and as the Indomitus Crusade fought to restore the shattered Imperium, Tassal acted as a beacon of light within the Dark Imperium. Ultimately, as with most chapters, the Supernovas received envoys of the Primarch. Initially, only 10 intercessors were sent to determine whether the chapter survived at all, but finding the Supernovas not only endured but were rapidly returning to full strength, an entire Primaris company was ordered to join the chapter. The Primaris were universally met with hostility by the Supernovas, although in each case the reasons were different. The first wave was suspect due to their seemingly outlandish claim that Robute Guilliman had returned, but the second wave were shunned because of the chapter cult itself. They were, in effect, all seen as novitae, with no one to vouch their worthiness. Not all companies accepted Primaris, and none were required to. The Fifth has more Primaris than any other company, for better or worse. In general, those Primaris who have adapted to the chapter cult and been bloodied are well received, though lingering doubts remain. The Primaris who cling strongly to Codex Orthodoxy face a long and uphill struggle. At present, the chapter cults are reluctant to accept the Primaris. The Fusiliers represent their only distinct subcult outside the standard Codex organizations, but in truth the chaplains, librarians and apothecaries of the Primaris are, if anything, less welcome than their ordinary brothers. None were present to join the Oathsworn, and Brock Firstforged himself has decreed no Primaris can ever adopt the name Ironforged. Time will tell as to whether the Primaris become full and true members of the Supernovas, or whether they will be left to quietly wither away and be forgotten. That said, there are those that fear the Primaris for another reason entirely: that they represent the fulfillment of a long-held belief that the end of days is nigh. Certainly, enough has happened to make some within the chapter believe the end is coming, and with Primarchs returning and Custodes abroad once more, perhaps in time the Primaris will be seen not as unwelcome outsiders, but the fulfillment of a prophecy 10 millennia in the making. For now, such things are in limbo, and the chapter will do as it always has: fight on and keep the faith.